I just said natural construction.
I said,
All right, we will have a little discussion about it, the first, 25 pages or so. Anybody like to get us started?
I feel like Fresleven,
Yeah,
like how he got killed by the natives and over hens, and then what made it worse is that at the end of that, how Marlowe said that he doesn't even know what happened to the hens, which they were probably eating or something. So it's like he cost his life all for like a dinner, which was kind of
yeah, and it was his anger.
Yeah.
That, and remember, it was a very calm, laid, laid back person,
tiny.
which adds to the mystery of Africa.
Are you talking about Kurt?
Talking about Fresleven, who died because uncharacteristically he lost his temper and went crazy, and yeah.
I thought that was like one of like several red flags that Marlowe kind of like experienced before getting to his final destination. And so like he seemed to like just kind of brush him off and keep going. There were a couple in that which is like, you know, like obviously he hears like even before he really signs the contract that this dude died. The last person that went on this died, and then he got measured by the doctor who also told him that most people like don't come back and stuff. So just a lot of red flags for him to keep going through with this.
What do they point to anything specific other than just sort of a nebulous danger out there? Is there anything
Well,
that
like,
they seem to have in
obviously
common?
the natives are kind of dangerous. Like when you deal with the natives, like obviously, what's his face, Frinsler or whatever. Frinsleven got in the argument over hens and they killed him and then dashed, and so just dangerous environment.
Ian.
and then carrying on with the red flags part, in the same doctor's visit, he's also told that they don't change on the outside, but right on the inside. And that's also just a very mysterious, hint about what's to happen to him. And then he's also told the story of the Swede captain who hung himself, or hanged himself as well, so that's just,
So-
hanged is correct. I
What
know
what
that.
does that point to? Any particular?
There's danger.
Yeah, but in particular, is there something, you said it's not on the outside, it's on the inside. Were you gonna answer that, Owen?
I was gonna talk about the French soldiers.
Were you gonna answer that, David?
Yeah.
We go David into you, okay,
Like,
since he was gonna follow.
Most people go insane, but
So it's a mental thing, or a heart thing, which, title of the book, will send you, but it's the way he describes it, it is kind of weird what's going on. Yeah, Owen.
I thought it was interesting, just the French soldiers shooting at the woods, because I thought you could relate that to racism, because it's like they're shooting at people they don't really know, and for no good reason. They're just shooting because they can. And I think it was just like how racists may try to justify that, or they just do things because they want to. They'll just like do whatever they want and just trample over other people if they can.
I was looking for he had a really good definition of at least imperialism. On page 50 says, the conquest of the earth, which mostly means taking it away from those who have a different complexion or slightly flatter noses than ourselves, is not a pretty thing when you look into it much. So that's a pretty clear definition of that. And before we'll go to over here, but Rollins. But think about that behavior, lobbing shells into a continent, and that's the way he describes it. What was the result of that? And what's the result of lobbing shells? Just lobbing them, not pinpoint. Of course, that didn't exist at the time, but
They just want to. They're paranoid. They're scared, and they just want to just destroy the land.
yeah, they don't know who's getting hurt. People are getting hurt. The land's getting hurt. Yes, Ron.
I was gonna talk about that too, about like they're choosing to pick on someone who doesn't have as much just like advancement in their country, and I think it's kind of relates to when the Americans first came over and did that to the Native Americans, and like how like they were kind of powerless in the hands of the Americans because of just their like And then I was gonna point out that part that you just said about how they talked about, it was really because they didn't look alike, and so I think that just continues to be a pattern throughout Europe, in history, and during that time, so.
And didn't they mention also on that same ship or another ship, what's going on in the ship itself? Trying to remember if it's the same ship, I think it is. Does anybody remember that? Let me see, it's right there, deserted an arrow, sorry, give me just a second. 58, well, I think it's the same ship, at least a ship. It says, we gave up her letters. I heard the men in that lonely ship were dying of fever at a rate of 3 a day. So it was a French ship, and you put those two together, they're indiscriminately hurting other people, but what are they doing to themselves? And it says they're dying. Why are they dying? They're not getting shot at. Why are the French sailors dying? All right, so in a sense, they're attacking a continent, and the continent's getting back at them. The continent's fighting back with malaria, or I assume, something like that. So to me, I've always thought that was interesting, that racism or colonialism, imperialism is self-destructive. You know, they may be doing some damage, but they're not helping themselves in it yet.
One thing that I thought added to the sinisterity, which is
Sinisterness probably is the best place to go.
that adds to the overall sinisterity of the book.
Please don't write that on your exam.
Is the relationship between the central station and the outer station. When he first goes to the outer station, they say we don't want to write written letters because we're afraid they'll be intercepted by the center or read. And I just thought that was interesting that they work for the same company and yet they're almost hiding information from each other. And then later, the central station, the general manager has the bricklayer, spying on other parts, and it made it seem very corrupted, the whole system of it.
And there are 3 stations. There's the outer station or company station, there's the central station, and then there's the inner station, is what they call where Kurtz is. And there are lots of things going on there that we need to look at. Yeah.
Well, just going back to kind of like the red flags Marlowe kept, or like that kept coming up to Marlowe, I think it could definitely easily be foreshadowing what is going to happen to him, and it could possibly be, something traumatic is really gonna happen to him that's really gonna mess his life up probably. I think that's why all the, incidences kept coming up.
We know that the malaria can kill you, but
Right.
as Ian was saying, I think that it's some mental, or it's something like that a lot of those red flags pointed to. It's something mysterious, and
Yeah.
I like Marlowe because it doesn't deter him.
Right.
He seems to be fearless, almost inquisitive. Wonder what this is. I want to go. I want to see what it is. Yes.
I find Marlowe's opinion about the African natives to be kind of, I don't know, it kind of contradicts itself, because he'll say he finds a lot of beauty in the African people, but then he's also saying how they're red-eyed devils, and he'll talk about them they need help and they shouldn't be treated this way, and then he'll turn around and talk about them like they're not human, or he'll try to I don't know, I just feel like he can't really make up his mind, and it was kind of hard because I couldn't decide if I don't know, if he was being racist in some parts and then in
Well,
other parts.
he uses the N-word. That's probably very common among people, particularly sailors, yeah. He's not sympathetic, cold-hearted. I don't think he dislikes them, but he doesn't really care about them. He's fairly objective, which is, you'd kind of want an objective narrator in a book, right? You'd want a narrator you could trust. Yeah, definitely.
I couldn't tell if this is irony or like on the part of.
Say that again?
I couldn't tell if this is irony on Marlo's part or Conrad's part, but I just thought it's funny how Marlo talks about the Romans and how they were just like killing for the sake of killing, and like it was just like raw anger and hatred. And then when he goes to the Congo, like he sees all these people like hurting Africans and like harming them simply because they are very understandable.
And when you mentioned the Romans, I appreciate you doing that. I'm heading back that direction. Remember the first words that is this about the first words that he says? I don't know if it's the first one, but he says, this also has been one of the dark places of the earth. So there's a connection between what the Romans were doing and what the British are doing, for sure. Yes.
I think like one of the, not the scariest, but like the, I don't know how to describe it, but the man that's like super cleanly, like one of the first like white men that he meets in Africa.
He was super what?
Like cleanly, like he has his shirts.
Clean, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
his shirts like ironed and he like looks nice, keeps his hair nice and stuff. It's, the contrast between him and then the place that he's in is, like even when the sick man is brought in and he gets annoyed that the sick man is coughing and stuff, when the man is like dying, the contrast between him and his surroundings is, interesting.
And remember, if we're talking about the same thing, the manager has this agent in there that is dying. Is that the one you're talking about? He could care less about the guy. You know, because that seems to be a part of the psychology here. Yes.
Well, I thought it was interesting to see Marlo's like interest in the maps, especially when he was looking at like the Congo and Africa, because it said that it looked like a snake uncoiled, which kind of like symbolizes that he's like going right into like danger.
And what else? Snakes. What? Yes. What of course is this? You should always, and whenever you see a snake in a book like this, what should you always think of? Garden of Eden, and like the heart of darkness, and that. I thought it was really interesting that. That just keep that in mind. It's called an archetype. Ms. Kay brought that out for you. You know, there's certain things that will usually mean the same thing in all kinds of literature. Yeah, that's a good point. I like maps myself, and I don't know, that was interesting too. I thought so. All right, who's next? Can we just go back around? How about Kat? Anything you want to add to this? And we can come back to you.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
How about Clayton?
I think you said earlier that you thought Marlo was brave, right? Am I getting that correct? I think that he's more kind of being naive about being on the company, because it's not that he doesn't listen, he fully doesn't even acknowledge these warnings that he's getting, or even really think about them, or notice them. And I think that kind of shows that Marlo's just kind of going into this as a fun adventure, when I feel like he does kind of need to assess the situation and see what's happening around him.
He really wanted a job.
Yeah.
And so he basically take whatever's available. You're right. He's a very practical guy. I need work. I hadn't worked in a while, so he's willing to do it. You're a good point. He doesn't even acknowledge that they're there. Yes.
I think like a lot of the people that Marlo is meeting have this very distinct sense of superiority over the natives, whether they think that they're like nothing and they can do whatever they want without having to worry about how they harm them, or if they think that they're actually doing a good thing by introducing like their influence to them. But one, like it's a small moment, but it stood out to me was when he talking about like that one guy that he meets, that he says his position had come to him. Why? Perhaps because he was never ill. He had served 3 terms of 3 years out there, because triumphant health and the general rout of constitutions is a kind of power in itself. So all of this like sense of who's civilized and who's educated and who's whatever, like it hasn't really been helping them much in this situation. This guy just like has good health and that's why he's in charge.
And the difference between civilized and uncivilized is really blurry here. What page was that?
Page 70.
Okay, that's what I thought. So think about his qualifications. He just never got sick. That's his secret of his success. Is that really something to be proud of? I mean, he really hasn't shown. In fact, it goes on to talk about, I didn't know how much to ask you of this, but I'm going to ask you now. What was the feeling that he inspired in others? You wouldn't have gotten that. I mean, you might not even read that far because it's midway down. Do you remember?
About the manager?
Yeah, the manager, yeah.
He, like, it's unsettling, he smiles in a way that, well, he almost smiles and it makes people uncomfortable, which gives him power.
Explain that. How does that give him power?
So, like, a lot of people have power either if they get, like, respect or love or fear, but because he has this, like, uncertainty about him, you don't know exactly what he's gonna do next. It's almost a kind of fear that people have of him.
Yeah, you're right. Uneasiness, because you don't know what he's going to do. He's unpredictable. That's his source of his power. And he has no genius, it says, for organizing, for initiative, for order. So he has no other qualifications. He never gets sick, and he makes people uneasy. And that's why he's risen to this position. Good. Emma Shea.
I am curious about Marlo's mindset for everything because it seems like the only goal that he's really focused on is to get the job or to make it to Africa. And he doesn't really seem to have any other passions besides doing that. Anything else that he is like excited about?
All right. Well, that's, you said it all right there. I think we don't know much more. You don't anyway know much more because you hadn't read him further. That's where he is now. And like I said, it makes for a good narrator because he can tell you if he has no feelings, he's not going to be influenced, or he certainly has feelings, but he doesn't show them. He's not going to be influenced by it. He's going to tell you like it is. David. Anything? I know you mentioned something the other minute, but I didn't know if there's anything you left out.
Okay, so he's always, in the beginning of the book he mentions how he always wanted to go to the portion of the map that wasn't always filled in, which was parts of Africa. And I think when he was in the office talking about how he wanted to become, or why he wanted to go there, and he mentioned that he'd always wanted to go there on the map, and the person interviewing him was surprised because he said that everyone would always want to go for the money and not for your reason. So I think that right off the bat he's definitely different than those people. I have a feeling that he probably won't go insane like the rest of the people because he's already different.
I like that. I think that's a good assessment of him. And while we have a few minutes left, if you have the questions, there are a couple I wanted to point out. One was chapter 13. We know what the company is. How does Marlowe describe their city? I can tell you that it's,
Is it the White Sepulchre?
yeah, sepulcher, yes.
How do you spell that? I said that, but I.
I'm trying to find the page.
S-E-P-E-L-C-E-R.
And what is a sepulcher?
It's a tomb.
Yes. And it's a whited tomb, or whited sepulcher. So it's a biblical allusion to what? Well, that's always the answer to every question, of course. But Matthew 23:27. Anybody have a Bible on you?
Is that right?
Well, it is Jesus. He does. Yeah, he meant, but that's not who the reference refers to. Anybody have a Bible on you? No. Nobody has a Bible on you.
In my locker.
I just won't get it right. That's why I wanted to quote it exactly. He compared the Pharisees to whited sepulchres. They're clean on the outside, but what's on the inside?
Death.
All right, so he says this city is like that. What does that tell us about this city? Clean on the outside, but they're bones, dead men's bones on the inside. Reminds me of the appearance of the guy who looks so clean, and the white suits. Of course, they're cooler. The white suits are cooler, but it's also symbolic. So how would a city be like that? Yes, David.
Their intentions, like, or what they want to do, is like they want a lot of money. They're really greedy.
So look good on the outside, but now we've gone inside the building, and we know what's going on the inside, and now he's gone to Africa, and we see it for ourselves. So it's a perfect example of that. And I'd like you to look there. It's question number 24. I think we're on the same page. It's page 63. Every time we write about this book, I'm always disappointed when people don't, I can't remember what the question would be, but when people don't refer to this passage, I'm always disappointed because it does so much. There's several things here. Look at the top of the page. Make sure everybody's with me on page 63. I don't know if I've asked you this question. Yeah, it is 24, but there's another question I was looking at. Anyway, top of the page it says, I've seen the devil of violence and the devil of greed and the devil of hot desire. But by all the stars, these were strong, lusty, red-eyed devils that swayed and drove men, I tell you. But as I stood on the hillside, I foresaw that the blinding sunshine of that land I would become acquainted with the flabby, pretending, weak-eyed devil of a rapacious and pitiless folly. And I'll stop there. So he basically says evil can be put into two categories. The devil of violence and greed, red-eyed devil, and then the flabby, pretending, and weak-eyed devil. What does he mean by that? Now, there are two ways to commit evil. One is the obvious kind, and I think we'll find courage probably fits in that category. Yeah.
Is it like sense of omission and sense of commission?
Yes, I think you're right. Explain the difference.
Sense of omission, sense of commission, or what most people think of sense, it's where you physically do something that is considered a sin, stealing, lying.
So it's an active kind of sin.
Whereas sin of omission is not doing something that you should have done, which is a sin.
Is it possible, did we have this conversation recently, some class did, is it possible to say that they are equally bad?
Yes.
Can you explain why? Why would it be equally bad not to do something as opposed to do something?
Because all sin is sin, and God sees all sin as sin.
But what about their consequences? Yeah, you're right, but what about the consequences? Or can the consequences be equally, or the responsibility of for evil be equal? Equal?
On earth or in heaven?
Well, we're just talking about on earth. Like the guy that shoots the guy, and the guy that stood by and watched him shoot the guy, and wouldn't call the police. Yeah.
Well, the person shooting was did that for a purpose.
Right.
And, you know, he can feel bad about it or not and move on with his life. But the person watching, I will always feel guilty that he didn't do something about that. And, you know, he could probably think that it was partially his fault that he didn't do anything. And he had,
And you know, you can't expect unarmed citizens to go in and face an armed man, but you can call the police afterwards. You can say, he looked like this, so there are things people can do. Even our laws distinguish the difference. You think the guy who shot him is going to get more or less time than the guy that stood and didn't do anything. I mean, the guy who shot him is going to get more time. That's a more grievous sin. One other question, I always think of it here. Is it possible that not doing your best at something could be a sin?
Yes.
How could that be possible? Like you just didn't put your whole effort into it. How could that possibly be considered a sin? You were inefficient. That's another thing. He compares the flabby devil with inefficiency. How can inefficiency be sinful or evil? So wasting time, it could be a positively bad thing, even though it's something you're not doing, yes.
The Bible says that everything we should do should be for the glory of God.
Right?
If you're being lazy and like not doing your best, then that's not really glorifying God.
Yeah, think about that. The idea of wasting time. I mean, everybody has to rest and relax. We're not talking about that. There's something positive about that. But simply procrastinating or wasting time. Anyway, there are two forms here, and you're going to see both here in the book. You're going to see both devils. We call them the red-eyed devil and the flabby devil. Just keep, the other thing, I don't see the question, but look at the next paragraph. What were some of the evils being committed in this company location? This is the first company headquarters. What do we call them? Company station.
Knitting is a huge sin.
What?
Knitting is a huge sin.
But what about here in Africa? When he gets to that company station, what does it look like? What are some of the details? We're on page 63. What are some of the details there? Yeah.
Are you talking about when there's like Western machinery?
Yes.
The Chan Africans are like destroying a cliffside for
Yes.
no apparent reason.
Right.
And there's also, I believe, a grove of people who are
Right.
either dead or dying.
There was a hole being dug for what purpose? It's just a hole. And then there was the rusted, unused. It just didn't seem to be any purpose. How could that be a sin? Lack of purpose. How could that be a sin? Like, what's wrong with not doing things for a purpose? And then you had the people that were actually dead and being mistreated. So just notice those details. I love the one about the hole that it had been dug for no purpose. I heard this at some concentration camps. They would put the convicts on a field, and they were required to tick up the stones and take it to the other end, and pick up the stone again and take it back to this end. And the whole exercise was taking stones with no purpose, was just moving them from one end to the other, and that killed people. People couldn't take the fact that there was no purpose in what they were doing. And I think you get both of them here. There are 3 stations, and the second station, I think it's 200 miles away, and Kurtz's station is much further than that. So he mentions here, on page 63, he says, I was only to find out several months later and 1,000 miles further. So he has to move to the central station, and then he goes to the interstation. At the end of the page, just make a note of this. It says, I had stepped into the gloomy circle of some inferno. So there's another reference. This whole book, you could kind of compare it to Dante's Inferno. We'll get that other stuff later. I do want you to read, it's on the board for next Thursday, and we'll finish it up before spring break. Meanwhile, we'll be doing poetry and practicing. And I'll be getting Huck Finn. I think it's Huck Finn. Red Badge, which is it? Red Badge. I've done Huck Finn. So have a good weekend. Yeah.